I feel like it's one of those problems in society that we just have to say, what are we going to do as a society? Because when you look at climate change, when you look at any of these, when you look at racism, when you look at any of these systemic societal problems, there is no one answer. The answer is, what are you going to do in your life, in your space, in your area of influence to move the needle and to make a difference? And the answer is going to be different for every person, right?
I 100% agree with that. I mean, yes, what are we going to do? Am I going to do? And that's one of the things that becomes problematic in criminal justice. That's one of my frustrations with the whole defund the police movement, that the police aren't doing anything. The police are harming people. Yet I, those very same people, I'm not going to call the police because they won't come. Yet oftentimes people don't want to take their own responsibility to do anything, and how to educate people on, as you say, like everyone has just their small area of existence and their everyday life. And there's very practical things that people can do to help and protect themselves and to increase public safety in their own communities. And I know it sounds cliche, but getting to know your neighbors and going outside, I mean, that's one of the most important things in our current digital culture. I mean, we've moved from the ethical, and I'm using other people. One of my favorite books is the book, The Aesthetics of Murder by Joel Black. And he talks about how we've moved from the ethical realm of the real, where people engage with each other in everyday real world, everyday life, to the aesthetic realm of the hyper real, where everything is media mediated. And in my book, I talk about how we've now gone to the digital realm of the unreal, where there's this huge blurring of boundaries between real and fiction for many of us. And what individual people need to do is get back out into the ethical realm of the real, be part of your local community, identify when you see a red flag, call the police when something happens, get to know your neighbor, go out and have the night out barbecues. Small little things that sound cliche make a huge difference when it comes to public safety and reducing the harms that can come from crime.
Yeah, I have a lot more faith in everyday people than I do in the media. I spent 35 years in the media. I tried to watch a local newscast the other night, and the first 12 minutes of the newscast was dedicated to violence and crime that had almost no relevance to me and my community. That model's broken. It's stuck. And, it's becoming less relevant by the day because they somehow think that I'm sorry that somebody got stabbed on the street somewhere. I'm sorry about that. But I don't need to know about that in my daily life. It just makes me depressed and afraid.
But can I ask you a question? Because I
Yeah.
really want to know, because the
Yeah.
biggest thing that needs to happen, and as a reporter, yeah, how can we get more pro-social stories and messages out? Because that is one of the number one things that I think could be done to mitigate some of the harms that come from violent media.
Yeah, I agree. And I battled for many, many years with young producers about the types of stories that we were covering. The problem with the current model of local TV news is that it evolved in a time before the internet. So think back to before the internet. A house fire was very unusual. You almost never saw a house catch on fire in person. So, wow, there's a house fire. Let's put that on TV. And it got viewers because it was unusual. A garage fire, that's unusual. A shooting, that was very unusual. A stabbing, that was unusual. So it became this delivery system of unusual and highly charged emotional content. That's how it started. And it has not evolved away from that. Viewership has plummeted. Back in the old days, you'd have 60, 70% of the population watching local news every night at the appointed time. So the model is flawed and based on an old system. The other night, that same newscast, they had a garage fire in the first 10 minutes of their newscast. Nobody got hurt. There was no takeaway. And yet they felt compelled to put a garage fire on the news. And they're wondering why people have tuned out. So And the flip side of that is there are some amazing storytellers in local media, especially here in Seattle. And when they do those positive stories, they're extremely popular and successful. The problem is the decision makers who decide which stories go where and when are still in control of the system. So instead of leading with that great pro social story, they lead with the stabbing that just happened, thinking that the immediacy and the emotional content will somehow be more compelling than that pro social story.
Well, and that's one of the, and I know we're probably running out of time here, but that's one of the things. I know there's a lot of opposition to social media like TikTok, but TikTok actually has a lot of really positive pro-social stories at the same time. And that's the whole, I think, point of TikTok, to have more lip syncing and dancing. And I mean, that's not necessarily the pro-social types of stories I'm actually talking about, but those types of different forms of media also bring with them positives
Yeah.
in addition to negatives.
And what's ironic, Jackie, is that the metrics are undeniable. On my social media account, I was at a restaurant in Seattle, and a waitress went out of the restaurant, and she went out on the sidewalk and she asked a homeless man what he would like to eat. And she started taking his order outside. And I snapped a photo of her taking his order. I was really touched by the fact that the restaurant ownership obviously was okay with that, and the compassion that this waitress had to actually do that. I put that on social media and it got like 25,000 views
Right.
and likes and comments.
Right.
And there's no disputing that content, we're craving that kind of content.
Right.
But the delivery system is broken. The delivery system. That's why social media is supplanting traditional media right now.
Yep, I agree. Yep.
Yeah. As we wrap things up, I'd love to ask your opinion about, you have a daughter in her mid-20s. I have some boys in their 20s. What do you hope that her generation does differently when it comes to understanding and dealing with crime?
Oh boy. Well, I hope number one, they get involved in their local communities and just do positive things and have positive messages come out. Maybe that is what's happening with some of the social media that we're seeing. Focus on positive pro-social aspects of interacting with people and focus on that instead of the violence and negativity and hopelessness and harm, and help each other and care about each other and be in the real world. And what I hope, and I say this in my classes all the time, we don't know empirically yet if children who are growing up and born into the digital age are going to be more prone to violence and media mediated violence, or less prone to it. It could be that, and my hope is that kids that are living and growing up in this digital culture are less shocked by it all and more sophisticated in terms of knowing when they need to spend time in the everyday world, being pro-social and helpful and hopeful and being members of their community, and living less in the sort of media mediated violence. And that's what I hope for my daughter and those younger, that they'll be able to sort out the damaging effects of media violence and be in that ethical realm of the real, and notice when they're in the aesthetic realm of the hyper real or the digital realm of the unreal, and be able to sort through it all and just be better members of their own community.
And I feel like, if you look at the numbers, our kids aren't watching TV.
No, they're not.
They're not. They're getting their news from the internet, from YouTube and from TikTok and from everywhere else. So I feel like they're a little bit more sophisticated in their willingness to expose themselves to awful negative content. And as we kind of wrap things up here, Jackie, this podcast is dedicated to redeeming work, and that is to showcase people who are doing great things through their work, but also showing that work can be a really honorable thing. You've spent decades of your career in criminal justice, and I'm so glad that there are people like you who want to study crime and criminal justice and try to figure out a better way of doing that. I don't even know how much of our GDP we spend on crime. It's got to be astronomical. So if we can prevent one crime, that would be amazing. just from a monetary standpoint and a psychological standpoint. What are your thoughts on redeeming work and work as a means to making our society better?